On this edition of Southern Newsweek, the government announces the budget for the coming year with billion-dollar spending in health and rail. NIWA's clean air monitoring goes to the classroom. And we check in with Queenstown's hospitals upgrade. Kia ora, good evening, I'm Melissa Barton. The new Dunedin Hospital took a giant step forward this week, with the government setting aside funding for the 10-year billion-dollar plus project as part of the budget. There's also been $1 billion set aside to redevelop rail, including $375 million for new wagons and locomotives.
The nation's first wellbeing budget has been delivered in Parliament. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says it's all about people living full lives.
To have the capabilities to do this requires tackling the long-term challenges we face as a country.
Mental health and rail are two major benefactors of the government's budget 2019-2020. $1 billion has been promised to rail development nationwide, including $375 million for new trains and carriages.
The previous government took a hands-off approach and left rail in a state of managed decline. Today, we begin to turn this around. Budget 2019 invests more than $1 billion over the next 2 years in modernising Kiwi Rail.
Mental health was the largest financial winner of the budget following the mental health inquiry. As is traditional, Leader of the Opposition Simon Bridges rebutted the budget, taking the Finance Minister to task.
It's as if other governments haven't had this at the heart of what they've been doing for decades and decades. And it is a nonsense, Mr. Speaker.
As Speaker Trevor Mallard called for order when Winston Peters took offence at being called old naughty by Simon Bridges, referring to him as young stupid.
Thank heavens we stopped that. You know, rail's in our national interest. And as the Prime Minister said, it makes our roads safer. It gets the massive leviathans going down the roads to be less frequent on the roads. It gives us a chance to have a balanced, strategic transport policy of sea, road and rail.
Budget 2019-2020 is set to be read in the House 3 times in order to become law. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A humble reminder of the gold rush is being preserved for future generations. Mrs Heron's cottage on the west bank of Lake Roxburgh is the sole survivor of the former 14-mile beach mining community, a hive of activity in the early years of gold mining.
Preserving a rare slice of Central Otago's gold mining history, Mrs Heron's cottage on the west bank of Lake Roxburgh is the sole survivor of the former 14-mile beach gold mining community dating from the 1860s.
It's very poor stonework. It's just the typical Celtic style, but it's just been thrown up to last a few years, but it's lasted well past that, of course.
The restoration work's been funded by Contact Energy, which has an agreement with Heritage New Zealand to work together to manage archaeological sites along the Clutha.
And it's going to be a great preservation of what's possibly the most significant piece of archaeological structure within the Roxburgh Gorge.
Heritage builder Chris Naylor sees the cottage as an amalgamation of a few different eras.
In the 1930s, when the gold miners came back up through and reworked the area, they chucked another bit on, but they just used, the way they've set the thing up is they've got internal gutters which have rotted out so that every time it rains or even just dew, you're getting water pouring into the building.
The cottage was originally home to Henry and Harriet Heron, who worked a gold mining claim at 14 Mile Beach below the cottage at the base of the gorge.
One of the great sort of stories is that he used to be paid in gold, and he every night used to just put this gold somewhere in a camp oven on about a 40-minute walk. And unfortunately he died instantly, and no one ever knew where the gold was kept. There's still sometimes people look for it today, but somewhere is a camp oven full of gold.
Or it could be underwater along with other mining sites and dwellings after the construction of the Roxburgh Dam in the 50s and the subsequent flooding of the gorge. Either way, it makes the preservation of Mrs Heron's cottage even more important. In Roxburgh, the South Today.
Blowing up balloons is usually a sign of celebration, but Arrowtown students are learning the town's air pollution is no reason to party. About 18 students from Year 8 have carried out experiments to test the school's air quality, learning about the impacts of breathing in air pollution as well as healthy heating habits.
A lot of hot air about hot air. This group of Arrowtown students helping scientists chart and analyse air quality data.
And so far this morning they've looked at a range of experiments to study air quality and air particles, measuring, and also looked at lung capacity, so they've done a variety of things.
It's part of a NIWA research program aimed at inspiring the Arrowtown community to reduce its notoriously high levels of air pollution. Scholes says the kids are learning in a very real and hands-on way, tackling a form of pollution which isn't always visible.
But also they're a great link to the rest of the community, to their parents. You know, it helps get everybody on board, you know, and makes the problem more visible, because when you're measuring air quality, it's not something that's always visible. It's easy to see plastic pollution, it's not necessarily easy to see air pollution.
NIWA's principal air quality scientist, Dr Ian Longley, says about 50 devices will be placed on power poles and a further 90 will be installed in people's homes over a 3-month period.
We can actually empower the community itself to be involved and take ownership of the problem. So we're working here now in Arrowtown. This is actually the 5th year of the project. We've done some trial work in Rangiora and Alexandra, but that's really been just testing the technology. This is the place where we're really starting to engage with the community and see if this sort of monitoring technology can make a difference to these communities to solve their air quality problem.
The region's air pollution is mostly caused by inefficient heating systems like outdated wood burners and burning wet wood and coal. Where the pupils are using low-tech balloons at this stage, Ian Longley says the next step is using professional instruments which aim to collate a sharper picture.
We've been designing small sensors that cost only a couple of $100, so we can put large numbers of them around town and get a lot more detailed information, which is more meaningful to the people who know the streets.
In the past, only one high-tech monitor was operated by the Otago Regional Council to collate air data. Air pollution has been an issue for many years around central Otago, with Southern District Health Board figures showing about 34 children are admitted to hospital each year with a health condition partly caused by poor air quality. In Arrowtown, the South Today.
If you thought moving house was hard, try moving an emergency department. Staff at Lakes District Hospital in Frankton started moving into their new purpose-built facility recently, 9 years after it was first promised.
An operation of a different kind at Lakes District Hospital. Contractors putting the finishing touches on the $6.5 million hospital upgrade 8 months after the groundwork started. Charge Nurse Manager Jenny Burt says the new emergency department is first class.
Well, it's a purpose-built emergency department. Our other department has sort of grown with the times as we've needed it. This has been designed specifically for top-rate emergency care.
Clinical staff have been training in the department over the past week. The new department's first patient was treated on Tuesday in state-of-the-art conditions.
We have oxygen and suction provided to every bay. We have much more room. We have proper isolation facilities, and we have 2 state-of-the-art resuscitation rooms.
The new wing, built by Lee's Construction, features 9 beds, up from 7, and another will be added as part of the second stage of the upgrade.
The CT scanner and the new district nurses' offices are due to be finished within the next couple of weeks, which will be a huge difference to us here, and then remodelling of the district nurses' office into telemedicine suites and the remodelling of the administration area.
The project's expected to be completed in September in Queenstown, the South Today.
Still to come on this edition of Southern Newsweek, it's all about protests. Firstly, Southern teachers joined colleagues nationwide for a day of action, and environmentalists clashed with the authorities at a mining conference. So see you after the break. Welcome back. Thousands of educators took part in strike action across the country recently. In Dunedin, more than 2,000 parents, pupils and teachers packed the Octagon, joining other protesters across the South Island from the West Coast to Invercargill.
They're as mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. Teachers, teacher aides, parents and pupils parading along Dunedin's George Street to a rally in the Octagon as part of a nationwide day of strike action.
Oh, we're thrilled with the turnout today. We think there's about 2,000 people, which means that all the primary teachers and all the secondary teachers, that we haven't got 2,000 of them, so we've got a lot of parents that are here, we've got a lot of children here. We're really thrilled that everybody's turning out for education because it's vital for the future of our children.
The Ministry of Education has offered teachers pay rises of 3% a year for 3 years and an extra step at the top of the salary scale. It says the offer would cost taxpayers $1.2 billion over 4 years. Protest action took place the length of the South Island as educators appealed to Minister Hipkins for a better pay and conditions deal.
We're trying to make sure that everybody gets what they need, and there just isn't enough time, there's just not enough resources. And we're getting burnout of teachers and teachers aren't remaining. And we're very concerned that we're not going to have enough teachers for the future of our education within the next couple of years.
The strike action affected nearly 800,000 children across New Zealand. On the west coast, around 300 turned out on a drizzly day to show their dissatisfaction with the Ministry of Education's final deal. Over in Ashburton, hundreds marched on a brisk winter's day, some with handmade signs, while others had the union supplied its time card. There were protests throughout central Otago, all with a similar look. Addressing around 100 people in Wanaka, Hawea Flat Primary School Principal Sue Heath says this is the time for action.
We have no choice. Our children are our future and their education is too important to not show that we have solidarity, that we are serious, that these issues facing the education sector have to be addressed now.
Her words inspiring a spontaneous round of applause. In Queenstown, more than 100 teachers and supporters marched in the shadow of the Remarkables, chanting as they came.
What do we want? Fair pay! When do we want it? Now!
Teachers from Roxburgh and Millers Flat joined forces to march along the main street of Roxburgh this morning. They say their ageing workforce isn't being addressed, leading to teacher shortages. In Timaru, several hundred teachers and supporters gathered at Caroline Bay before marching down Timaru's Stafford Street, arriving at Labour-list MP Joe Luxton's office. Members of PPTA and NZEI unions have rejected the government's offer because they say the ministry hasn't offered anything to relieve teachers' workloads by providing more classroom release time. In Dunedin, the South Today.
The University of Canterbury Student Volunteer Army returned to Kaiapoi recently, aiming to leave a lasting legacy with trees. Formed after the 2011 earthquakes, the Canterbury students were joined by a new chapter of volunteers from Waimakariri for a major project.
Doing the hard yards for the greater good. University of Canterbury, along with Waimakariri student volunteer armies, working on a misty Canterbury day, aiming to plant nearly 500 trees at Kaiapoi's Silver Stream Reserve. Volunteers coordinator Nolene Francis says they're thrilled with the many hands making light work of the mammoth task.
They've come to help us plant 600 trees that have been donated by Trees That Count. So we're hoping to get it all planted and mulched today if we can.
She's pleased with the extra help as volunteers aim to plant more than 2,000 trees this year. Projects like this one on the Silver Stream Reserve are supported by the Waimakariri Council.
The stream was developed first, started in 2006. It was handed over to the Waimakariri District Council, who fund us.
She says the planting is part of a project over several years to restore the 52-hectare reserve, which once formed part of the Waimakariri River's North Branch. The Canterbury Student Volunteers say the Army has more than 3,000 members and a lasting legacy following the earthquakes.
So we've got 3,000 members each year, and we do just everything from large-scale projects up to 700 to 1,000 volunteers, all the way down to this sort of stuff every weekend. We can get anywhere from 10 to 40 out, just doing work around the community, helping people out. And it's just all about students giving back, being part of their communities and creating change, essentially.
He says they help with projects every year and are encouraging Year 10 and 12 pupils around Canterbury to volunteer in their communities. One of the people inspired by the Canterbury students' work in 2011 is 17-year-old Waimakariri SVA founder Artemis Hinkson. She says this project is back where they first helped the community.
Yes, actually our first event was back right here in December, start of December. We did a lot of mulching and helped mulch an area of the reserve.
Waimakariri volunteers Sasha Kerrigan and Amber Smallridge are proud to be doing their bit to help.
Well, you kind of get to see what good you do and you see how much change you do.
Yeah.
And
Also makes you feel good because like you're helping others in the process.
Yep, and you're making new friends.
The Silver Stream Reserve volunteers are set to hold a community planting day during the morning of Queen's Birthday Sunday, aiming to plant another 500 trees. In Kaiapoi, the South Today.
Fiery scenes erupted outside the Dunedin Town Hall recently as climate action protesters blockaded entrances and jostled to prevent delegates entering the Minerals Forum conference. 3 people were arrested and a woman was taken to hospital after police officers tried and failed to remove protesters who leaked arms to prevent access to the venue.
Heated confrontations outside Dunedin Town Hall this morning as climate action protesters blockaded entrances and tried to prevent delegates entering the Minerals Forum conference. Police tried to pull protesters away from the doors. Deborah Robb had her glasses broken during the incident.
Are these your glasses?
Yeah.
How did that happen? Was it the police?
Because my head got so squashed, my glasses just got pushed off and I was trying to pick them up, but there were just feet everywhere.
Has anything like this happened to you before?
No.
At a protest?
Protesters linked arms and sang protest chants outside the Harrop Street entrance to the Glenroy Auditorium. A woman was injured as police made attempts to break through the protesters' blockade. She was carried to safety by police after suffering apparent leg injuries.
People's shirts have been ripped off, one of our friends' chest has been damaged and someone's just been sent to hospital for a potentially broken knee.
Police officers also lost their footing in the scrum and had to be helped to their feet by other officers. 3 people were arrested and released without charge.
We've had people as old as 85 to younger kids come and join us. I'm disappointed with the police, the way they've behaved, and I'm disappointed with Red Badge, and I'm disappointed with the lack of engagement from delegates. They don't want to speak to us. We had one of them tell us that climate change isn't real.
The 3-day forum is being attended by representatives of the country's largest mining companies. A reporter inside the conference says it appeared most delegates had made it inside by 10:30, many using side doors. Protesters say they want to disrupt the conference as a message to the government and business owners. They won't tolerate them extracting any more coal.
There's all these mining communities and the research has shown they're the ones with the lowest rates of employment and poverty, and the coal isn't good for them. It doesn't make a prosperous New Zealand, and it contributes to 46% of CO2 emissions. It's the single largest contributor to human-induced climate change.
She says they've certainly made themselves heard today, but may be back tomorrow. The conference winds up on Thursday. In Dunedin, the South Today.
And following on from that story, police are rejecting claims by demonstrators of a heavy-handed response to the protest. Around 150 protesters clashed with police and security guards in several fiery conflicts outside the town hall. Some protesters say the authorities acted violently, but police say officers were gentle with demonstrators.
Climate change demonstrators clashing with police and security guards outside the Dunedin Town Hall yesterday. They were protesting a mining conference being held in the city. 3 people were arrested, 1 protester was taken to hospital, and a woman glued her hands to the doors of the town hall during the raucous day. Inspector Will Black was in charge of the police operation and rejects claims by protesters of a heavy-handed response.
And from the footage that I've seen, I would say that the police have been, the word I'd probably use is quite gentle in the way that they've dealt with the protesters. From what I could see, they did their very best to ensure that both the protesters and the delegates were looked after.
About 150 demonstrators made clear their opposition to the coal industry and its effects on climate change.
My understanding from what I could see was the protesters almost had a sit-in to try to prevent the delegates from getting in. So as you recognise, the delegates have got the right to move into that venue as well, so it wasn't particularly helpful to have them sitting there.
Demonstrators were often successful in preventing delegates entering the forum, but the police presence was bolstered by small teams from around the country.
So we had teams from Te Waipounamu, so we had Christchurch was there as well. We brought a small team across from Queenstown, and we brought a small team down from Wellington.
Red Badge security guards also came in for heavy criticism, some describing them as overly violent and confrontational. They declined to comment, referring requests to Dunedin Venues Management Limited, which says it has no knowledge of any complaints. There were suggestions of similar scenes around the city today, but that hasn't eventuated. In Dunedin, South Today.
Still to come on Southern Newsweek, a Mid-Canterbury artist reveals another large-scale mural, and we say goodbye to a Dunedin dining institution. So stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Transport Waimate has added another huge artwork to their landmark silos. Artist Bill Scott has been commissioned by Transport Waimate to paint the wall of an old flour mill, adding a familiar image of a well-known local woman.
Captured in paint as she was in life. This image of the late Stella Chamberlain hanging out the local footy team's jerseys, painted by artist Bill Scott, is a record of a lifetime of dedication to the community.
Oh yes, it was Stella Chamberlain, wonderful lady who passed away recently, but this is an acknowledgement of her dedication to washing the jerseys effectively of the rugby team for many years.
The mother of 13 children was made a life member of the Waimate Rugby Club in 2009, just a few years before her passing in 2014.
Mother of a large family who supported her children, and they all played sport, and just her little contribution to the whole thing really is just a wonderful way of saying thank you and, you know, acknowledging a wonderful lady who did a lot for the sport and for the town really.
Scott's painted more murals on the Waimate silos of other prominent locals and says this mural is a great way to remember a lady who was always toiling away helping Waimate. He says painting outdoors in autumn posed a few issues, but he managed.
Oh, it went very well. I mean, our biggest enemy this time of year was the just the coldness of the wall. It's a south wall, so sort of pick our days to get a bit of work done, but other than that, it went very well. You know, it was reasonably close to the ground this time, so that was a little easier. So most of it was just done off a ladder. But no, it's gone quite well.
Scott says Stella Chamberlain did it the old-fashioned way, soaking the jerseys in a bath and washing them by hand before wringing them out. And did it just because she loved rugby and loved doing it. In Waimate, the South Today.
For the past 29 years, Kevin and Hong Zhuang Li have worked nearly 7 days a week in the kitchen of their Dunedin restaurant, The Asian. During an emotional farewell, the couple say they aren't quite sure what they'll do now to keep themselves busy.
Time for last orders at Dunedin's The Asian restaurant, closing its doors for the last time. Last night, when the final customers finished their meals and paid their bills, the red open sign outside was switched off for the final time.
And we serve some of the customers, 3 generations. Some of them are usually say, well, I'm quite sick to miss them.
At the end of the week, they hand over the keys to the building that they've worked and lived in since moving to New Zealand from southern China nearly 3 decades ago.
It's a big change. Maybe I've been 29 years ago when the kid was the second son is only a couple of months old. Maybe start now it's a bit of changes.
Not much has changed since they first opened in terms of some aspects of the interior and the food on offer. Lee says among the many items on their extensive menu, there were a couple of firm favourites.
Was the cashew nuts and pork and beef fillet.
Always the favourite, wasn't it?
Yeah, always favourite, and the crispy chicken.
Since announcing at the start of the year they'd be selling the restaurant, it's been full most nights and it's been impossible to make a booking in the past couple of weeks. Like many culinary institutions, The Asian had many regulars. Anne and Graham Mee of Wingatui dined at the restaurant about twice a week for the past 25 years. There were a few tears as Hong briefly sat with the couple in between courses.
She's just like my sister.
Yeah. And what was it about the restaurant that gets you so emotional, I guess?
Not her, just the food. Being here, we come here at least twice a week. We just about are Asian. That's all we like to eat.
More than 200 people sat and ate a final meal last night, with many more ordering one last takeaway. The Lees are set to move to Christchurch in December, and while they're not quite sure what they'll do in their retirement, there's no doubt they've left an indelible mark on Dunedin. In Dunedin, the South Today.
It was a big couple of days for chook breeders around the South Island, with the annual poultry shows held in Rangiora and Dunedin.
Definitely something to crow about at Rangiora's annual poultry show over the weekend. While chicken fanciers provided more than 400 entries, an outbreak of a nasty virus prevented pigeons from displaying their beautiful plumage.
We've got 451 entries, which is a fantastic turnout. Unfortunately, no pigeon classes allowed at any of the New Zealand shows this year due to rotavirus.
Assistant Secretary Sarah Wiley says as a responsible club they're trying to help contain rotavirus, and no one was crying foul about the variety of birds on display.
So we're trying our best to reduce any contamination or anything going on. So it's all forms of chickens, poultry, bantams, ducks. We've got geese here for the first time, and we've also got a turkey.
Flynn White's modern game bantam was almost obscured by the number of award cards pinned to its cage, but it seemed to be more interested in pecking for grain than being cock of the walk. Rangiora's event wasn't the only poultry show on over the weekend, but Wiley says their feathers weren't ruffled.
Yeah, we do. We clash with Dunedin, so we lose a few of the exhibitors that live in the middle of the South Island. It's a pretty much 50-50 toss of the coin as to whether they go north to North Canterbury or south to Dunedin. But we've done fantastic considering we lose a few of those exhibitors, so more than happy with our turnout today.
Judges even made special dispensation for one jive turkey to strut its stuff, but organisers say these geese were well worth a gander.
It's Sebastopol geese. Beautiful, beautiful birds. So they have curly feathers, they don't fly. Quite an amazing looking bird. Definitely need to get a couple of shots of those.
The next major events sure to have fans flying in from far-flung destinations are the National Poultry Show in Nelson at Queen's Birthday weekend, along with the Christchurch Club's show also being held next month. In Rangiora, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, subscribe to odt.co.nz and follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Have a great evening. Ka kite anō.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.